listener production.
Hi, happy Friday and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sasha Barbagat. The final countdown to the US presidential election is on, and the once relatively media-shy Kamala Harris has this week decided it's her time to shine.
There's a campaign sense you get the feel that the idea behind doing these media interviews now is to rip the Band-Aid. Get it done. You're 4 weeks out from the election campaign.
With the polls showing Harris and Donald Trump are effectively tied, will this week's media blitz help Harris revive the momentum she gained by replacing Joe Biden? Or is her campaign running out of steam right before voters go to the polls in November? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, time for the headlines with Chris Spiru. It is Friday, the 11th of October.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. We start in the US this morning, where the death toll from Hurricane Milton has climbed to 10, and that's at the time of recording. It made landfall on Florida's west coast yesterday as a Category 3 storm and spawned a barrage of tornadoes across the state, destroying at least 100 homes and leaving 3.4 million people without power as it headed east. Milton brought intense rainfall with winds ranging between 140 to 160 kilometres per hour. It has since moved out to sea, Sash.
Yeah, it's worth noting it had started as a rare Category 5 hurricane, but it did gradually weaken to a Cat 3 in the Gulf of Mexico. So that catastrophic storm surge that had been predicted and feared never actually materialised on land, which is good news. President Joe Biden says his administration is on the ground to respond, recover and rebuild. They've allocated thousands of federal personnel to affected areas, including more than 1,000 members of the Coast Guard.
We've already approved emergency declarations for Florida. We have thousands of federal personnel on the ground, and we've staged and are ready to go. We have 20 million meals, 40 million litres of water. Now,
damage was really widespread and the cleanup will take weeks, if not months. Water levels could also continue to rise for days, but Governor Ron DeSantis said, luckily, this was not the worst case scenario. And speaking about it yesterday, when it was still a Category 5 storm when we were recording the headlines, the outlook was terrifying. So I think in this case, Florida has escaped the very, very worst of what could have happened. That said, Milton is the 5th most intense hurricane ever to be recorded in the Atlantic, and that includes the Gulf of Mexico.
Back home now, where another COVID-era ban on Aussie imports is coming to an end in China. Anthony Albanese says he secured a promise from Chinese Premier Li Qiang to lift the ban on Western Australia's rock lobsters by the end of the year. It's a big win for the industry. Imports to China were worth $700 million before Beijing locked out Australian seafood, coal, barley and wine as part of an economic campaign against Canberra. And that was in response to comments made by the then PM Scott Morrison during the pandemic that China should be investigated for the origins of coronavirus. Rock lobsters were the last Aussie product being locked out of the lucrative Chinese market, Sash, and hey, they're coming back to China.
Yeah, it's good news. Definitely really excellent for producers in WA because, $700 million is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. And they want to make it available in time for Chinese New Year, which is obviously early in 2025. So it looks like that's what's going to happen. Look, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and Premier Li did also discuss some more serious issues. Not that this isn't serious, but some pretty intense stuff. They were in Laos on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit. They were talking about what's been going on in the South China Sea with confrontations between China and other countries, and also the recent intercontinental ballistic missile test that China carried out in the Pacific. Now, Albanese says, that the dialogue between our countries is continuing in a positive way. That doesn't mean you're always going to agree with each other, but he's going forward to, I suppose, represent Australia's interests. So these meetings, when they first started happening earlier in the year, were like big news, but now it's becoming a bit more commonplace. And that's through diplomatic efforts by Labor and Anthony Albanese. The way Australians die is evolving, according to the latest figures from the Bureau of Statistics. The total number of deaths in the country in 2023 fell by 4%. Now, that was largely thanks to a drop in fatalities from COVID, while dementia is on the cusp of overtaking heart disease as the leading killer in Australia. So 16,922 people died from heart disease. That's the lowest number since 2019. But the number from dementia and Alzheimer's victims reached 16,685, so only a couple of hundred behind heart disease. So improvements in medication and our ageing population is thought to be behind this new trend. Now, we actually talked about dementia a few months ago. We interviewed a filmmaker who had gone into homes around the country, retirement homes, and been with people who were suffering from dementia. It's really interesting to see how that is becoming the prevalent disease in our elderly. It is already the leading cause of death among women, which accounts for 12.2% of all female deaths in 2023. And for the first time, it is now the leading cause of death as well in New South Wales, joining both South Australia and the ACT. So it's inevitable that it is going to take that top spot from heart disease.
Overseas now, where Princess Kate has attended her first official royal engagement since finishing chemotherapy. She and Prince William met with the families of the 3 young girls murdered at a Taylor Swift-themed dance event in northwest England at the end of July this year. They also spent time with the dance teacher and emergency services who responded to the tragedy.
Yeah, and it's been a full-on year for the Princess of Wales, who revealed her cancer diagnosis earlier in 2024. She then faced scrutiny after seeming to disappear from public view, even though the palace told the world that that's exactly what was going to happen as she underwent treatment. So Kate has since wrapped up treatment and released, you might remember from a month or so ago, what can only be described as this really ethereal and pretty video when she was talking about her journey to staying cancer-free.
The cancer journey is complex, scary and unpredictable for everyone, especially those closest to you.
We also saw her step out for a church service last month, signalling that she is slowly getting back to public life now.
And finishing up today's Bumper Headlines edition with some very welcome news, Sasha. Our Socceroos didn't lose to China in their World Cup qualifier clash last night.
Woohoo!
Jeez, that's a lot of words. But look, our boys claimed a 3-1 win at Adelaide Oval last night, which some, including myself, thought impossible, given that we've had a winless start to the qualifiers and that China opened the scoring in the first half after 20 minutes. But nevertheless, we equalised late in the first half during extra time with a cracking header from Lewis Miller, at which point I decided to go to bed.
Yeah, ditto. I watched the first half as well, and then I was like, gotta go to bed. Gotta get up for headlines.
Yeah. But we woke up this morning to find out we scored twice in the second half, a screamer at 53 minutes from Craig Goodwin and a cheeky goal from Nishan Villapille in extra time.
Now a bit of space for Craig Goodwin to advance into and pull the trigger. Oh, what a goal! That's a stunner from Craig Goodwin.
And it is worth noting there were over 46,000 fans that attended this game at Adelaide Oval. And that's a record-breaking crowd for our Socceroos in Adelaide.
Is it? Excellent.
Yeah.
Go the Socceroos. And hey, quickly, sticking with sport, huge news out of the tennis world overnight. Rafael Nadal is retiring.
Hola a todos, estoy aquí para comunicaros que me retiro del tenis profesional.
Rafael Nadal.
So that is part of the video message Rafa has released revealing the news. It is all in Spanish. The 22-time Grand Slam champion is considered one of the greatest players of all time and will call time on his career after the Davis Cup finals next month. Sad, but we're seeing all those old guard members. I mean, who's the last one left? Djokovic, really?
Yeah, and I mean, he smashed a career goal in Paris this year. That was the last thing that he said he really wanted to win. So congratulations to him. And yeah, like we saw Federer retire. It's only a matter of time before we see Djokovic kind of doing the same thing with injuries and stuff like that. But look, we do have the new guard coming through. So that's Sinner, Alcaraz, Tsitsipas, of course, from my homeland.
What's the chant again? Remind me.
Las Tsitsipas.
Las Tsitsipas. We'll adopt Tsitsipas for you, okay? That can be our
Thanks, guys.
That can be our new tennis champion. But yeah, all the best to Rafa as he enjoys retirement. Still got the Davis Cup coming up later this month. So hopefully he has a good time at that and then can enjoy a very well-earned retirement. Chris, thank you so much for joining us for the headlines. Next up, we're getting into our deep dive looking at Kamala Harris's media blitz. Will it work or is she on the path to lose in November?
Hey, Bension here. Kamala Harris is no media darling. The VP turned presidential candidate has been pretty shy about doing sit-down media interviews since she replaced Joe Biden in August. But this week, with the polls extremely close, she has been on a media blitz.
The Late Show, of course, is just the latest stop in her media blitz this week.
Madam Vice President Alex, welcome to Call Her Daddy. It is good to be with you.
In the last few days, she's appeared on 60 Minutes.
We met the 59-year-old vice president this past week on the campaign trail.
Howard Stern.
The consequences of him being president again are brutally serious.
They really are. God bless you.
Yeah.
You should be president.
The View.
Please welcome back the next president of the United States.
Plus Ink Master, The Mandalorian, and explaining the child tax credit on Bluey.
From podcasts to talk shows to serious sit-down interviews to late-night comedy, Kamala Harris has been yapping. So with 27 days and counting left till the American people decide between Harris and Donald Trump, will this media blitz be the boost that she needs to scrape over the line, or could it backfire? Johnathan Kearsley is the Nine Network's US correspondent. Johnathan, welcome to the briefing. Why has Kamala Harris been so reluctant to sit down for interviews before now?
I think the campaign has been trying to orchestrate a move that they deem to be quite clever. Initially, it started with the social media blitz, and you sort of remember that sort of Brat Summer style culture and that phrase that kind of got etched into people's minds a little bit. But then I think what we've seen in recent days here in the United States in particular is her starting to, I suppose, cave, if you want to use that word, to pressure from Republican sides to do more interviews. I mean, whether the public actually really matters, whether they think that this is significant that she's not doing interviews, well, the campaign clearly thinks that that is an issue because she's been doing more of them. Why hasn't she been doing them? Well, they may well have been deeming that it is better to do this stuff later in the game rather than early on in proceedings. She copped a lot of criticism early on after accepting the nomination and then eventually doing a sit-down interview alongside her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, for CNN. And that was, again, widely criticised because she was sitting down alongside somebody else rather than doing it alone. So it's kind of almost like you can't really win in this situation, she may well feel like. So what we have seen, yes, in recent days, sitting down for these high-profile interviews, but still it seems Republicans are not happy. They've accused her of accepting softball options, and Donald Trump even going as far as calling for the release of transcripts of an interview she did, while he also denied an acceptance to do the same sort of interview.
What kind of strategy do you think this week's media blitz shows? Because some of these interviews were really quite softball, but one of them wasn't.
Yeah, look, I think take a look at where she's done these interviews. She's obviously done the sort of harder ball 60 Minutes interview. She's done an interview on a US panel show, The View. She's done Stephen Colbert Late Night, where she was in front of a live studio audience, sipping from a can of beer and doing the sort of populist things that you would expect a leader to do during a campaign.
Would you like to have a beer with me so I can tell people what that's like?
Okay, the last time I had beer was at a baseball game with Doug.
So cheers. There you go.
And then going along to Howard Stern and talking to Howard Stern as well, the popular radio presenter here in the United States. So, look, what is it doing for this campaign? Well, I think she's obviously trying to send a message now that she is willing to do these interviews. Now, they may very well be softball. The Trump campaign is trying to say that, look, you know, they will do interviews, but Donald Trump refused to do a CBS 60 Minutes interview, the same one that Kamala Harris did. He denied taking part in that program, essentially said he didn't want to take part in that program. But then you've got somebody like J.D. Vance, his running mate, who is essentially holding rallies that have almost become press conference-like. So the Republicans seem to think that this is a big issue. They seem to think that this is something that voters really care about. And I think what you're seeing now is the pressures of some of the campaign, because this is such a tight race. There has not been a presidential race in the United States of America as tight as this in quite some time. It is still a few weeks out now until Americans will ultimately decide who their next commander-in-chief will be. But the pollsters at this stage cannot predict who is going to win this race. So I think what you're seeing is some campaign strategy. There's a little bit of give and take on both sides. Kamala Harris caving to some of the pressure and the push from the Republicans to do these interviews, doing the interviews, and then being accused of taking the softball approach anyway. I think the fact that she's doing them is a sign from the Democratic campaign that they think they need to do something in order to try and shut down the Republican argument.
Harris starts off with this interview on the enormously popular women-focused podcast Call Her Daddy. She and Alex Cooper talk about reproductive and abortion rights, women's empowerment, achieving success in the face of doubters. This was pretty friendly territory for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, look, this was friendly territory. This is a very popular podcast in the United States, and it was going to be a very women-friendly issue. These are issues that Kamala Harris is very comfortable talking about. These are issues she wants to be talking about. She wants to be talking about protection of women's rights, protection of reproductive rights. She wants to be talking about the issue of abortion that she argues Republicans are effectively trying to outlaw in many states. So, yeah, look, this was comfortable territory. Obviously, that particular podcast, the Call Her Daddy podcast, has invited Donald Trump to come along. Let's just wait and see whether that happens. I reckon that chance is highly unlikely, Bension.
Yeah. Her strongest argument during that interview probably was when she was responding to that quote from Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
I saw the governor of Arkansas said, "My kids keep me humble." Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble. How did that make you feel?
I don't think she understands. There are a whole lot of women out here who, one, are not aspiring to be humble. Two, we have our family by blood, and then we have our family by love. And I have both.
What do you think of that response from Harris?
Yeah, look, I think Kamala Harris is clearly trying to take this issue about not having children on the front foot. She's been attacked by this by J.D. Vance. She's been attacked on it by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And really, how much is it going to weigh on the minds of voters whether or not she has biological children? I think she obviously does not like the attacks from those senior figures, particularly from Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is obviously a woman herself. And what the Republicans are doing, though, they're trying to get under her skin. They're trying to really antagonize and frustrate and irritate the Democratic presidential nominee. But essentially, there has to be a question in all of this too, though, about where does a line get crossed? Essentially, this was Kamala Harris choosing in her life not to have children and not to go down that path. And I think she's clearly saying, when she told the Call Her Daddy podcast, that she says, I don't think she understands there's a whole lot of women out here who are not aspiring to be humble. Take a look at that, for example. The idea that, having children keeps you humble. There are plenty of people out there, you would argue, who are humble without having children. So look, I think this is a strategy from Republicans to try and get under the skin of Kamala Harris. Whether or not it works, look, I think she's trying to tackle the issue head on at this stage.
The big serious interview that she sat down for, as you mentioned, was the American version of 60 Minutes. She did okay. I think it's fair to say, but she seemed to struggle most when she was explaining her and Joe Biden's approach to undocumented immigration.
Was it a mistake to kind of allow that flood to happen in the first place?
I think the policies that we have been proposing are about fixing a problem, not promoting a problem. Okay?
But the numbers did quadruple.
And the numbers today, because of what we have done, we have cut the flow of illegal immigration by half.
But should you have done that?
We have cut the flow of fentanyl by half, but we need Congress to be able to act to actually fix the problem.
Look, I think this has been part of the problem with the perception around the Harris campaign. The line has been that Kamala Harris is not as strong in interviews as she could be, and that is true to a certain extent. She certainly appears at times to not get lost or confused, but to almost double up on things or double back on things. And yes, those comments, that answer in particular, that is an issue for her. She knows it's a political problem. She knows the issue of the border is a sensitive issue, particularly in those southern states. Georgia, where she's really looking to try and keep that state blue. Nevada, Arizona, where she's desperately trying not to lose those states too. But this is an incredibly tight race, and she's probably of the mind that every single thing that she says is going to be analysed and reanalysed. So, yeah, look, she's not as strong in interviews as she probably could be, but this is a real test for her, because if she is going to be Commander-in-Chief, what sort of public persona is she going to put out there? What sort of media presentation presentation is she going to put out there? Is she going to be one that does interviews, or is she not going to be? I think what we're seeing now is her trying to adjust into this role of being somebody who can front a camera, who can sit down and do an interview and tackle the issues head on, but still there seem to be some problem areas where she's having difficulty in trying to convey exactly the sort of message that she wants to. I mean, let's take a look at the interview that she did with The View, I think, as well, where she gets asked on that panel show, what would she do differently that Joe Biden has done over the last 4 years? And essentially she says nothing, not a thing she would do different. And that played exactly into the Republicans' hands, that they're trying to say, look, this is just 4 more years of the same of what they say they have seen under Joe Biden. And how would it really change? Within minutes, though, you see her change her answer, try and wind it back and say, oh, well, hang on a minute, I would put a Republican into my cabinet. There you are. You're looking for a point of difference. There it is. So it's clear some of this stuff she's still thinking on her feet. Time is running out in this election campaign, but ultimately a voter's going to be looking at media performances. Are they going to be looking at policy? Are they going to be looking at personality? And we'll find out not too far away from now.
60 Minutes did this big call out on Donald Trump for agreeing to be interviewed, but then backing out at the last minute.
The campaign offered shifting explanations. First, it complained that we would fact-check the interview. We fact-check every story. Later, Trump said he needed an apology for his interview in 2020.
Harris also went on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, who gave this opening.
It has been a tradition here at The Late Show since yesterday that the major party candidates sit down with me for an interview in October. We invited Kamala Harris to be our guest this evening, and she accepted. That interview in a moment. In the interest of fairness, we also invited former President Donald Trump to go himself. He declined our offer.
Do you think outside of the Republican Party and the leaders of the Democrats, regular people care whether you turn up on the serious interview show?
Some of them, yes, they are. They want to see these interviews as a chance to be pressed on the hard issues, be pressed on the serious stuff, rather than just giving a campaign stump speech. Is the argument, though, around whether or not somebody does interviews per se, is it going to weigh heavily on the minds of voters, particularly when you're talking about people out in rural and outer suburban areas of some of these crucial swing states like Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania? You got to think about what is the ground game in these areas, because they're picking up on certain things from social media. How much are they actually going to be taking out of these interviews? I mean, yes, these candidates need to be pressed on their policies. They need to be pressed on their issues. Ultimately, though, how much is it going to weigh into the minds of voters, or are they looking at other issues? Are they looking at issues around policy? Are they looking at issues around cost of living? Consistently, when people get polled here in the US, it is looking at that issue as the number one ranking issue among voters. Then you've got issues around women's rights. Then you've also got issues around immigration. They are the areas where people, the top 3 areas consistently that people are looking at. So look, yes, they're looking to these interviews for answers, but how much whether or not somebody does them is directly going to impact their vote? Well, I suppose we'll find out on election day to a certain extent.
Harris's campaign might have hoped that this was a strategic time in the final sort of stretch of the campaign to do this media blitz, but it's coincided with 2 major hurricane disasters. Do you think that it could all be for nothing, or do you think it could actually really blow back on Kamala Harris because she might look like she's distracted at a time of massive disaster in the US?
Well, exactly. You've got Hurricane Helene that hit a couple of weeks ago, and the damage still being felt by that. And those same areas that were hit back then are now being hit by a new hurricane, Hurricane Milton, which is slamming the coast of Florida. And in hours, we'll find out exactly the devastation that has been caused there. Look, there's a campaign sense. You get the feel that the idea behind doing these media interviews now is to rip the Band-Aid. Get it done. You're 4 weeks out from the election campaign. They were not largely very challenging interviews, aside from the 60 Minutes one, and she had to slip up a little bit on The View about whether or not she would have done anything different compared to Joe Biden over the last 4 years, but rip the Band-Aid off, and I think now you will see her focus on the hurricane response. I think you will see her standing effectively side by side with Joe Biden, getting briefings, and then in the days ahead, once the dust settles and the disaster zone becomes much clearer, yes, she'll probably go out to these areas and see these people and see the victims and see the damage for herself. They are going to want to make her look presidential. I think right now what you're going to see is there will be another shift. There will be a shift now to show her in a presidential looking light, responding to a natural disaster. The test will come is how is that emergency management going to filter through on the ground? I mean, you could look at areas in North Carolina and Georgia where the last hurricane caused massive damage, and what is the impact of those hurricanes going to be on people voting? Are they going to be able to get out to vote? How are they going to feel about the federal emergency response? They are crucial states. Florida, not a swing state as much in this presidential election, but still, you are going to see politics play out in these disaster zones over the course of the next week or 2 weeks or so, maybe even right up to Election Day.
Well, Johnathan, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks very much for having me.
Johnathan Kearsley there. He's the US correspondent for the 9 Network. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might be interested. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and our content on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.